The RG552 is the sequel to the RG351 retro gaming emulation handheld from Anbernic, and the RG552 makes such an improvement over the RG351, I can safely say it is the next generation of retro emulation gaming handhelds. Now, if you love everything in the world of gaming, from modern to retro, and have a particular soft spot for handheld gaming, then you are in the right place, because here on the Chronik Spartan show, we love everything in the world of gaming, and we particularly love our handheld and portable gaming too. If that sounds like your kind of thing, then hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you do not miss out on future content. Right, now let's talk about the RG552. Now, the RG552 or 552 or whatever you want to call it, I called the RG351 the 351, and I got into a lot of stick because people said it was the RG351, but we're not going to get into that right now. I'm calling it the 552. It's the sequel to the RG351, the awesome series of retro gaming emulation handhelds from Anbernic. Now, we've got absolutely loads to go through, so let's just get right into one of the most important aspects, the emulation. The RG351 had fantastic emulation, covering systems from the 8-bit generation all the way up to the PlayStation 1. The RG351 also covered N64 and Dreamcast as well. However, you could say that the emulation on the 351 for the N64 and the Dreamcast was a bit optimistic. Yes, it had emulators built in for those systems, and you could load pretty much any game you could imagine, but it didn't play the games particularly well. There were audio issues, frame rate issues, and I would say that the emulation itself was around about 70% effective. Now, I'm somebody who can be quite forgiving when it comes to emulation, but even for me, playing Dreamcast games and some of the N64 games was just not possible. The same issues could also be said for the PSP emulation on the 351. Now, some of those issues were solved with further firmware updates, but the 351 was punching above its weight when it came to the PSP, N64 and Dreamcast. So when we heard about the RG552 coming along, we got really hopeful that it would solve the issues of emulation in those areas. And I can safely say it's taken a massive leap forward in emulation for the N64, Dreamcast and the PSP. Now, all other systems that the RG351 covered, the RG552 covers as well, so there's no issues in those areas at all, and there's no point to go into detail for those. Consoles from like the Game Boy, the NES, all the way up to the Mega Drive, the SNES, and even the PlayStation 1 are handled with absolute ease on the RG351 and therefore on the RG552 as well. But the really nice thing to see is that the extra processing power and grunt that we have in the 552 really helps with PSP, N64 and Dreamcast emulation. Now, the Dreamcast emulation still isn't 100% perfect. There can be some frame rate issues, and there can also be some audio issues as well. But in comparison to the 351, I would say that the 552 hits around about a 90% on effectivity for Dreamcast emulation. And when we talk about the PSP, we're also looking at awesome emulation there as well. With the only issue I did notice on the PSP emulation, a slight frame rate drop in certain games. For example, Ridge Racer, I noticed the frame rate dropped to around about 20 FPS, which was noticeable, but it did not stop from enjoyment of the game. And when it comes with N64 emulation, I came across no issues whatsoever. So it's really nice to see that the RG552 not only takes a step forward in emulation, but actually genuinely enables us to play extra consoles. Because like I said previously, I don't think you could really say the Dreamcast was playable on the RG351, whereas it is definitely playable on the RG552. Now, one of the biggest and most noticeable differences on the RG552 is the operating system. The RG351 and previous Anbernic consoles all came with a proprietary RetroArch OS built into it. Now, I personally love that OS and found it incredibly user-friendly, but it wasn't for everybody. And a lot of people were crying out to have access to an Android OS as well. And Anbernic have listened, because instead of coming with a pre-built Linux OS, the RG552 comes with Android built in, which means as soon as you power on the device, you are treated to a stock Android OS system with a load of emulators already loaded for you. Now, fans of the Linux RetroArch OS do not need to worry, because Anbernic also deliver the 552 with 2 memory cards as well. One memory card comes with absolutely thousands and thousands of retro ROMs, and the other memory card comes with the Linux OS built on, which means that if you don't want to use Android, you can just plug in your memory card with the Linux OS in, and you can fire up the proprietary, more user-friendly RetroArch OS. This is a really nice touch, and something that Anbernic didn't really have to do, because providing 2 memory cards is obviously an extra cost. past. But I think they realized that there was a lot of customers that wanted the Android OS, but there were also a lot of customers that really liked the proprietary software that was already on there. So they've give you both options, which is absolutely brilliant and a really great user-friendly choice. And this is what really takes the RG552 to the next generation in terms of retro emulation handhelds. It's that option, it's that freedom that you get with the console that you didn't get with previous consoles. Now we will get into that in a bit more detail later on. Now previous Anbernic models like the RG351 enabled you to go into sleep mode. Now sleep mode is still available, however sleep mode only works now in Android OS mode. When you're in the Android OS, you can just hit the power button and it will go into a sleep mode, as you would expect on any mobile phone or tablet. However, if you're loaded using the Linux RetroArch OS, then sleep mode doesn't work anymore. And that for me is a bit of a shame. Sleep mode was a really useful function. It's not the end of the world because with save states you still kind of get the same functionality, but the difference is that with a sleep mode, you were able to jump back into your game way quicker than it would take if you were to load your game and then have to load a save state. I'm not entirely sure of why it doesn't exist in Linux mode anymore, and it is a bit of a shame, but like I said, it is still available in Android OS mode. One thing to note, however, is that sleep mode in Android OS seems to work a bit differently, and I think it works in the way that Android intends it to work, which means that it does actually use a lot more power in Android sleep mode than previous consoles did when they were in sleep mode during a Linux OS. I'm guessing Android has a lot more things running in the background during a sleep mode as opposed to Linux RetroArch, which didn't really have anything going on. Which means that while you are in sleep mode, you will drain your battery quicker than you would have on previous consoles. Now battery usage itself is going to be higher, and that's because this console is a lot bigger than previous Anbernic consoles. The RG552, as stated by the name, comes with a 5.5 inch screen, and that's what the 5.5 stands for in the name, whereas previously the 351 came with a 3.5 inch screen. This is a 5.5 inch screen, and along with it comes a familiar but much bigger form factor, putting a lot more demand on the battery, because now on the RG552 we've got a built-in fan system as well as a touchscreen. Coming with an Android OS, a touchscreen absolutely makes all the difference. There's a lot of retro emulation handhelds out there that don't provide a touchscreen, and the Android OS can be really clunky to navigate. However, the RG552 makes sure that the Android OS experience is as spot on as possible by giving us that touchscreen that is so needed. But Anbernic have bulked up the system, and you can easily get 8 hours out of this system, something which is quite impressive considering all the extras that this comes with. Furthermore, Anbernic not only provided us with the two memory cards, one which was the 16GB for the OS and the other was a 64GB for all the games, it also put 64GB built into the system as well. And this is a really nice extra. This gives you so much space to add pretty much every game you could ever imagine onto the system, especially when you consider the fact that the RG552 can emulate systems like the Dreamcast and the N64, consoles which have ROMs that take up a lot more memory than consoles like the NES. All that extra built-in memory is going to go a long way when it comes to that. Now there is one thing about the RG552 that I wish they'd changed, and that is the layout of the shoulder buttons. I said in previous episodes about the RG351 that I would have loved to have seen staggered shoulder buttons, kind of like we see on the Nintendo Switch Lite. I find that that's a lot more comfortable and ergonomical, and it's a lot more user-friendly when you consider some of the consoles that the RG552 can now emulate. Consoles which had those buttons, consoles which even had triggers like the Dreamcast. Not having something like an analog trigger option on the RG552 does hinder the ability to fully emulate some of those games. And the layout of the shoulder buttons being in series as opposed to staggered does make it a bit difficult to use all those buttons comfortably. And I really do hope Anbernic listen to this advice and try to address this in future iterations. Something else which is a little bit more fiddly than I would like is that they've now introduced a function button. Previously, to bring up something like the RetroArch menu, you'd just press both thumbsticks in. However, now to bring up things like the menu, you have to hold the function button and press B. And the function button, used in combination with a load of other buttons, provide other functionality like quick save states, etc. Now it does exactly what it needs to do, and it isn't a hindrance really at all. And as a matter of fact, it actually saves you overwriting save states by accident. But sometimes you just really want to get a save state at a really tricky part in a game, and being able to hit both the thumbsticks in was a really nice quick way to bring up the menu, whereas having to put your thumb underneath the console, press the function button and then press a different button is a bit tricky. On top of that, you've got to figure out what all those button combinations are as well. Other users out there might prefer this, but for me it's a slight hindrance and something that I did prefer on previous consoles. For Android, to get back to these menus, it's just like you would use it on a mobile phone. You can bring up the actual context-sensitive menu on Android, go back and it'll bring up a screen like that. Which one is more user-friendly is up to you to decide. Both have the pros and cons, but both are easy enough to figure out. Now, another improvement to the form factor of the RG552 is that it now has a HDMI out slot, which means you can basically use this like a Nintendo Switch. You can play your retro games on the big screen using the RG552. That is awesome and something that we really needed with the previous consoles. Now, the HDMI out is a mini HDMI slot, so you'll need to have a cable which is HDMI mini to a standard HDMI out to connect to your TV. And it works really, really well. I couldn't see hardly any lag in the system whatsoever when connected like that. The one downside is that the audio still comes through the handheld device. It doesn't come through the TV. I would have liked it if audio came through the TV while the cable was connected. However, if that's an issue for you, then there is another option. And this is where the RG552 is really starting to shine and flex its muscles. Because you have Android built into the system, you have a world of apps that you can access and download, which means you can download a casting app and enable yourself to cast your RG552 onto any Android compatible TV or device, which effectively is the same as trying to plug it into the HDMI. And by doing this, you also get the audio coming out of the TV. What's more is you don't need a cable connected to the TV, which makes it a lot more easier and a much more functional way to play. The downside is that because you're casting over Wi-Fi, there is a slight lag. Now, we are talking very slight. In some games, it will have more of an effect depending on the type of game it is. But in most of the games I tried this with, it wasn't an issue and you quickly got used to it. So again, it's up to you. What is your preference? Is lag more important than the audio coming out of the console or not? Neither solution is perfect, but they are very, very close. And the best thing is that you've got the option, you've got the ability to try different things. And what's even better is that you can play your retro game in handheld while somebody else watches you playing it on the TV. That's a really nice extra. That's a really nice addition to have. And like I said, you don't need any cables getting in the way for you to do that. Now, as we've just alluded to, you have access to millions of apps now on this device, which opens this device up to a whole new world, a whole new concept of what this device is. This is no longer just a retro emulation handheld. This is now an entertainment device in every sense of the word. Starting off, you have access to so many more emulators than the console comes with. So for example, the console doesn't come with a GameCube emulator built into it, but I downloaded a GameCube emulator from the Play Store. And then I went ahead and downloaded some GameCube ROMs. All of this whilst not connecting the device to anything, all through the device natively. I didn't have to use a PC or anything for this. And within about 5 to 10 minutes, I was playing GameCube games on this device. Now I have to say that the GameCube emulation isn't perfect, and there is a reason why it didn't come natively on the system, but I was absolutely blown away with the abilities of the RG552 and how well it actually really did emulate GameCube games. I would go so far as to say that the RG552 can emulate GameCube games as well as the RG351 could emulate Dreamcast games. And that gives us a lot of hope for the future. On top of that, you have access not only to other emulators, but you also have access to game streaming services. Game Pass, Stadia, Antstream all work on this device, which now makes this device not only a retro gaming emulation handheld, but a modern gaming device as well. And this absolutely blew my mind. I went from playing Sonic the Hedgehog to playing Cyberpunk 2077 on this, all within the space of a couple of minutes. Not to mention the ability to download movie streaming services as well. This now, the RG552, is my #1 entertainment system. It is my favorite way to consume entertainment right now. A few months ago, I put out a video saying that we needed handheld systems that could handle game streaming services, modern systems that are able to handle Game Pass, Stadia, Antstream, and all these other game streaming services. Because as we can all see, that is where modern gaming is heading. That is where a lot of handheld gaming is heading from the big companies. And now the RG552 has come along, and not only is it a game streaming handheld, it's a retro gaming emulation handheld, it's a movie device, there's so many things, and it does everything all by itself. The RG351, I had to take out the memory card, plug it into the computer, download ROMs and plug it back in. The RG552, I just jump onto Android, go onto Chrome and just download whatever I want, whatever I need. At the outset, when I first got this console, my first thought was, how does this compare to the Nintendo Switch Lite? My main reason for thinking that was because of the form factor and the way that it looks. It looks very similar, it's got a very similar size now, and they definitely seem to be trying to compete with the Switch Lite in terms of the design. Before I fired up the RG552 though, I genuinely thought it's not really going to be able to compare with a Nintendo Switch Lite in terms of a modern gaming console. Yeah, it's going to be a fantastic retro gaming emulation handheld, but it's going to pretty much draw the line at the generation of, let's say, N64 Dreamcast. I didn't think it would be able to go toe to toe in the modern world of gaming. Little did I know though, that the RG552 could do what it can do, would give me access to game streaming services like Game Pass and Stadia. And before I knew it, I was genuinely comparing the RG552 to the Nintendo Switch Lite as a modern gaming handheld. Now this is not an RG552 versus Nintendo Switch episode. I might do one, but this isn't it. The Nintendo Switch offers so much in terms of first-party Nintendo games that no other console can offer. But the RG552 offers so much freedom, so much potential and possibility, you can't disregard it from the argument. And what makes this comparison even more relevant is the price point. The RG552 is a lot more expensive than the RG351. As a matter of fact, it's double the price. And when I first heard of that price point, I thought, it's a bit steep. You're asking people to pay that much just for a retro gaming emulation handheld, just for what I thought was going to be a small improvement on the previous generation of those handheld consoles, and maybe a bigger screen. The RG552 comes in at the same price as a Nintendo Switch Lite, around about that £200 mark. But having owned an RG552 now, having used it for over a couple of weeks, I can definitely understand that price point because it offers so much more than just those retro games. It is a full entertainment system in the palm of your hands. Now, if you do want to get your hands on an RG552, then there will be a link in the description below. Now, if you enjoyed this episode and content like this, and you do want to see an RG552 versus Nintendo Switch episode, then hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you do not miss out on future content. Once again, thank you for watching and see you next time.